Hello everybody, welcome to this instruction video. In this video I'd like to show you how to connect the squares that we've been making during last dance on the beach crochet along by Scheepjes. You'll be using Merino Soft or Color Crafter this week, and you'll be using the color that you have the most of in your kit. If you're in doubt, just check the pattern exactly which color you need this week for your Color Crafter and Merino Soft yarn. Regarding hook sizes, I went up a hook size this week, so I used a 4.5mm for my Color Crafter and a 5mm hook for my Merino Soft squares to join them. Because you need a larger hook size, because the stitches that we're using, they tend to pull, and having a larger hook size helps you to prevent this pulling, that you get a nice and flat join. Like I said, I only went up one hook size, but if you're a tight crocheter, going up 2 or maybe even 3 hook sizes will really help you to get this join nice and flat. I'll be showing you how to do these 4 squares, how to join first in the one direction and then in the other, and as we go along I'll discuss where things can go wrong and what you should pay attention to. I'm only showing you these 4, but the concepts that you see here, they of course apply to the rest of the blanket also, and it just doesn't all fit in front of the camera if I try to join an entire blanket for you. So I'll first do the one direction, then I'll do the other direction and take you along step by step. Going to start joining our squares. This is week 10 if I recall correctly. This is week 3, and we're going to be starting on the top right hand corner. So this is the top right hand corner, and we're going to start with the vertical join. Now to join these squares we're going to use the back loops of our stitches, or sometimes we call them inner loops. Let me show you exactly which loops I mean. If you look at any stitch here, this is a stitch that's one of your border stitches. If you look at that stitch, you see a loop here on the right and on the left. That left loop there is the closest to the table if I were to put them flat, and that loop is in this case an inner loop. We're going to use this loop to attach to the other square. And the same on the other side. If you look here, you've also got 2 loops of course for your border, and this loop here, that one is the one again closest to the table, an inner loop. Why we call it an inner loop? If you put these 2 together like so, it's these 2 loops here, this one and that one. Those 2 make up your inner loops, and those are the ones we're going to use to connect these squares using slip stitches. So if you've got them on the table, they're closest to the table. If you take them like this, these are the 2 loops directly next to one another. So this is the top right hand corner. I'm going to start at the top and then work my way down, but of course I can't crochet the other way around, so I'm going to be turning these squares to actually crochet them together using slip stitches. And the join we're using is called a zipper join, because you'll notice it's nice and flat when we connect these 2 squares. So to start actually joining our 2 squares, this is your corner. You see here the 2 corner stitches that are still marked with a stitch marker from when we were actually making the squares. You could also have a thread in here. That's the corner, and then the stitch just below, that stitch is the one you're going to start in. So, and then of course you want the inner loop, so it's that loop. And if you look on the opposite side, this is the corner stitch, and the stitch just below, and of course that inner loop, so it's that loop. Those 2 loops are the loops you're going to start with. And what you'll be doing is from corner to corner, so from this marked stitch to that marked stitch, these are 30 stitches, but you're actually not going to work all 30, you're only going to work 29. So if you have the stitch that you've marked here, and then that stitch you're going to start in, so that's number 1, up until the marked stitch, that's number 29. So those 29 stitches you're going to work, and equivalent 29 stitches on this side also. So you're going to be joining from the second stitch there up until the corner. got a slip knot on my hook, just a regular slip knot as though you were to start a square, and we're going to start joining these two. This is week 10, that's week 3. Just have them turned sideways. Of course your blanket is like this, but I have them turned because I simply can't work upside down. With a slip knot on your hook, you're going to start by picking up the second loop from the end. Here, this is the corner, that's the end. Then the loop, the stitch just below, that's this stitch here, on the edge that you're going to be working. The second stitch, the inner loop. That loop is the one you want to pick up. So corner stitch, stitch next to it, inner loop. Then on the opposite side, you also have the corner, it's the marked stitch, stitch next to it, and then that inner loop of those two, that inner loop, that one there. Also going to catch that loop, you're working from top to bottom. You now have 3 loops on your hook. You're going to take them all off. This is just a regular slip stitch that you're working through all 3 of these loops. And that's your first stitch made. In essence, you're going to do this on all of these next stitches. So on the next stitch, pick up a loop. Pick up your inner loop, and on the opposite side, the same position, that second loop, your inner loop. Pick up 3 loops on your hook. You're going to take off in one go. And again, this side pick up a loop, and on the other side pick up a loop and take off. I'm going to turn my work, so now I have it upside down. You can maybe more easily see what I'm doing. I'm going to pick up a loop on this side, pick up a loop on the other side, and there we go, and pull through. And this closing method isn't called the zipper join because you're getting a flat join, and that's what I really like about this, is that it's a very neat and tidy join. A way of connecting squares that is the least intrusive method, in my opinion. You get a beautifully flat join here, and you want all of these stitches to be the same size because that gives you the nicest effect. And this is also a little bit of practice. If you're doing this for the first time, you might find this a little tricky, but just keep going, keep practicing, and I'm sure by the time you do your 3rd square, you'll have a much better knowledge of how this stitch works than maybe your first 2 or 3 stitches that you've made. So you're picking up a loop on either side, always the 2 loops that are next to one another, and that way you're joining your squares. So continue like this, working this very nice and clean join until you get to the other side, to this position. So I'll make a jump in the video and I'll see you when you're almost to the end. Almost to the other side. Still got a few more stitches to go. Picking up a loop on either side, and your last stitch is going to be the marked stitch. It's a stitch you're going to stop in, and then you would have made, if everything went right, 29. You will have connected 29 stitches. And on the other side also. 2 more. You see this stitch here, and of course the corner, and on the other side you've got 1 stitch there and the corner. So those are the last 2 you're working. 1 on this side, 1 on the other side, and slip stitch through those. Then your last 2 stitches here in the marked stitch, which is your corner, to take the inner loop on that side, and on the other side also take the inner loop, and the stitch markers are slightly in the way, but that's okay. You can remove them if you want, but I'm just going to leave them because when we come the other way I want to show you exactly which stitches you need, and then it's easier if those markers are still in there. And a slip stitch, and there we go. And now I've connected this first 2 squares, so week 10 and week 3, and now I can connect the next 2 squares. So we've just done the first 2 squares. This is of course the right hand top corner, and now we're going to connect the next 2 squares, which are these 2 here. This is week 11 and week 2. So you've got here 10, you're going to connect week 11 to that, and you've got week 3, you're going to connect week 2 to that. And take a moment to look at the orientation of your squares, because you could have these turned in several directions, and if you're not paying attention you could even have them the wrong way around. So make sure you have the right side facing and you have them in the correct orientation, that you don't have them turned accidentally. So make sure your squares are all the right way up and the right side facing, and then we can continue with this vertical join, so in this direction. I'll be turning my squares to actually work on them, but note you'll be connecting week 10 to 11, so you have these 2 on top of each other, and week 3 to week 2. So this is the orientation, and then we're continuing and working this edge here. So to connect the next squares, I've got here week 2, and then this is week 11. And take a moment to again look at your squares. You see this here is the corner, and you're going to do exactly the same on this side as you've done here. So again, the corner stitch, you're going to start in the stitch just below, so that's the second stitch, and then again the inner loop. So that loop there you're going to pick up. The same on the other side. You've got the corner, the second stitch, and that inner loop. That loop there. Those 2 loops you're going to pick up, do a slip stitch, and then work exactly the same as you've done on this side. Let me just grab a hold of my work. So this is the corner, you've got that stitch marked there. Then the next stitch, inner loop, pick up, and on the other side, that's the corner, the stitch next to it, your inner loop, pick up. And what you want to do now is you want to work a slip stitch, but you want to make sure that this stitch has the same size as all of these others. And what can happen is that if you let all of this open up, so you'll see this stitch will become larger than those. And you want your attention to be even and your stitches to be the same size. And one way of doing that is making sure that these 3 loops are close to each other and just pulling a little bit on that first loop, because you'll have a tendency to open it up while you're joining these set of squares to those set of squares. So just pulling it slightly tight, but not too tight because you don't want the stitch to be too short. You just basically want the same tension as you've had on these stitches. And make sure these 3 loops are close together. Yarn over and do a slip stitch through all 3 of those loops. And now you've connected these squares to those squares. You're going to continue in exactly the same way. So your next stitch is pick up your inner loop, and on the other side, just see exactly where it is, and that's that loop there. Pick up your inner loop and work your slip stitch. And again, you want all these loops to be the same size. You see how those loops there are the same size as those and those. You want all of these to be the same size. That's what you're going for, an even tension. And if this doesn't happen the first time, maybe it will the second or the third. This does just ask a little bit of practice. So don't be discouraged if it doesn't happen immediately the first time, that this first edge looks a little messy. Don't worry, do your second and your third, and by that time I'm sure you'll have the hang of it, and then come back to this first row and maybe consider doing it again. So take your time on these, working one slip stitch after another and connecting these squares. So So your inner loop on the one side and your inner loop on the other, and work a slip stitch. And what you see happening here, if I just flatten my work, is you see this line, this continuous line, and that's exactly what you want. You want these to just flow in the same direction, to just have this edge like so. So continue this line until you get to the end here, to this point, and then we're ready to again connect the next 2 squares. So continue working a slip stitch through the inner loops until you get to your next corners. Almost to your next edge, your next corners. So we're still doing the same, picking up those inner loops and working slip stitches through them. So one on this side, one on the other side, and take off. As you're doing this more and more, you'll notice that you tend to speed up. You'll start working faster because you're getting the hang of it. Please make sure that your tension stays the same, not that you work more tight or more loose at the end than you did at the beginning, because you still want all these stitches to be nice and even. You still have 1 stitch left. That's the corner on this side and the corner on that side. So you're taking the inner loops of these 2 stitches. That's a loop on this side and a loop on the other side, and work your slip stitch. And there we go. And now you've worked your second 2 squares and you're ready to connect on this side your next 2 squares also. So when you've done the first 2 squares, you're going to continue and adding your third set of squares, which will, for example, be these 2 here. Actually, you want that not to be upside down, of course, so it will be in that direction. So let's say it's these 2, and then you join them. And when you've done that, you would again join 2 squares and again and again and again until you have your first row of 2 squares, 2 sets of squares. When you've done that, you're going to cut your yarn and start with your next row. So what you're going to do is you're going to start here and join your first square in this position. So then you would start here exactly the same as you've started here. So then you join there and make all those slip stitches until you get here, and then again you join your next square. Let's for a moment assume it's this one, and then you again cross over and you do this join, and then again the next square. You're going to continue like that until you have all your squares joined in the one direction, in this direction. So you're going to have a lot of squares that are all kind of dangling on these joins, and then we're going to do this join. But what's very important when you're doing your join in this direction is make sure that this edge here is straight, because what can happen is that accidentally your work turns like this, because this isn't joined yet in this direction. This can happen, and especially when it's lying on the couch, the strangest things happen. And then all of a sudden your work, for example, if you have already connected it like this, say you've already done this join, then it's going to be very hard to undo this. Then you're really going to have to cut and pull and frog and do again. So make sure that your work is not twisted like this, but stays everything the right side facing. So continue, do all these joins in this direction, and then I'll show you how to do this direction. So we've just done everything in the vertical direction. So you've got all your squares connected to one another, and you've got all your joins in this direction. And now we're going to start working in the horizontal direction. So we've done everything vertically. Now we're doing horizontally, and we're going to start on, for example, this edge. You can work from top to bottom or bottom to top, just what works best for you. I'm going to show you how to work this edge. So starting here, going inwards, how to deal with this crossing, and then go to the other side again. Have a slip knot on my hook, and you're going to start exactly the same way as we've done all the other edges. You've got here the 2 corners, and you're going to start in the second stitch, that's this stitch, and again take the second loop, or the inner loop I should say, and then this side take the inner loop. And you're going to continue and again work all your slip stitches. So I've got a slip knot on my hook, the corner stitch, the stitch next to it, take the inner loop, and the other side, the stitch next to the corner, take the inner loop. Bring these loops a little bit together because then it's easier to do the slip stitch. Like so. And now you're ready to do exactly the same as we've done before. So hook up the inner loops from the two stitches that are across from one another, or adjacent to one another I should say, that's maybe more correct. And then pick up the one loop and pick up the other loop and work your slip stitches. Keep your tension nice and even because you want all these stitches to be the same size. So the one loop and your other inner loop and work a slip stitch. You can see how I've now worked these first two stitches, and this you're now going to continue all along this edge until you get here to your crossing. So work all your slip stitches, all the stitches across one another. When you get here, I'll just show you how to deal with this crossing. Almost to the crossing here. Got a few more stitches to do. Just picking up your loop on either side. And it does get more and more fiddly as you get to your crossing, because you've got less and less room for your fingers. So at a certain point you'll have to have your hands more below your work than on top of your work. And let me see, you've got two more stitches. Yes, a stitch here in the corner and then a stitch there in the corner. So the last two loops on the stitch there. And now you're on a corner, and that's going to be the last stitch you're going to work here, because that's why I left these stitch markers in here, because this is the marked stitch. You're going to work this stitch and then we're going to cross over to the other side. So I'm just going to pick up the loop on your corner here and on the other side also, those two loops. I'm actually going to just remove the stitch markers because you don't need them anymore at this point. So those two loops and pull through to complete your stitch. And now you've actually worked everything up to the corner or to your crossing. And now we're going to cross over, and here we're going to do exactly the same as we did when we were working in the other direction. That means if you look at these stitches, you see here's the marked corner. So you're going to go to your second stitch. It's going to be that stitch and the next stitch. Those two loops, you're going to work a slip stitch through those two. Which means you can skip everything that's in between. So the corner itself and the slip stitch you have there. On that side, pick up a loop, and also on the other side, pick up a loop. And what you want to do is you want to make sure your work is nicely together. These loops are nicely together. So you don't work them like this, because then you're going to get one very big loop here. And you don't want that. Then you're going to get a loop that looks like that. You don't want that. You want them all nice and tidy, just like the ones you already have. So I'm going to pull them just a little bit together, like so, to make sure my tension is correct. Yarn over and pull through, work that slip stitch. And this one, you really got to take care of this one, because if this stitch is too big or too small, I'm actually not happy with that stitch. That stitch is too small. You can see that I worked it too tight. You see how small that stitch is? That's not correct. You want them the same size as these. So I'm actually going to do that again, because that was a bit too enthusiastic. You want to keep your tension correct and not work it too tight or too loose. And that does just take sometimes that you repeat a stitch. Like so. Keep your tension a bit more even and work slip stitch. And I'm more happy with that. You see how that stitch more resembles those, so I'm much happier with that. And now you can continue and again work all of your slip stitches by picking up your inner loops on both your squares, the adjacent loops, the ones that are directly facing, and then continue your join. And I've just missed it, like so. If you look at what you've made now, you see I'll just remove these stitch markers because you don't need them anymore. Just work that in there, that little stitch that you don't have it facing out but just part of your work. If you look at it this way, you'll see a nice even join in both directions. So continue working this edge until you get to the other side. When you get your crossing, make sure that your stitches are nice and even. And then when you've connected everything in the horizontal and the vertical direction, actually I should say vertical and horizontal, then you're finished for this week. Good thing this week you do not have to work away your yarn tails. You can just leave them. So that's very nice this week. You can work them best away when we're doing the border next week. So continue, connect all your squares, and then you're ready for the border.